What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 85 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a weekly video game podcast where two best buds from different nations come together to discuss the wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Stephen Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steve. It's good to be back.
Yeah, welcome back. How you
I
doing?
missed a heck of a week.
You did miss a heck of a week. E3 died. And what else
E3
happened?
died.
Oh, the Last
New
of
Zelda
Us
footage.
New
The
Zelda
Last of
footage,
Us came out on PC and it was a
It was a
nightmare.
disaster.
Every
Yeah.
show there was something crazy. I was watching
was
from
a banger.
afar.
Well, let's quickly recap that before we get in. What do you think of last week's, I guess, bombastic week, bumper episode?
I mean, when it comes to The Last of Us of it all, right? I feel like that feels like an unforced error on Sony's part, wanting to line up with the end of the show and pushing it out the gate while it was still hot. Disappointing, but unsurprising. Breath of the Wild 2, or I'm sorry, Tears of the Kingdom, I should say, looks great. I have some questions about what I saw, but I think broadly, I'm more excited than not. And I think the new things that they're adding feel like meaningful additions, but also feel like kind of natural evolutions.
I don't even think they're additions. I feel like they're replacements. I don't think we had the old stuff in there.
That's a great point. And that's one of my questions is like, what does that look like? Who's to say? But I do think the new stuff we saw feel like natural evolutions of the mechanics from the original game. And I think that's the thing I'm most excited about is like, how do you get past the sophomore slump? It's like, it's meaningfully evolve. And it feels like that's what they're trying to do. How some of those things feel in practice, we'll have to see. Obviously, the big one, right, is the E3 of it all. Again, I can't say it's surprising based on the last couple of weeks and the names we saw pull out. I think you and I had a few conversations about kind of like, what does this show even look like if none of these folks are here? And, if it does go through, like, do you have a ton of people that bought tickets and then don't ever want to go back because it was so lame, And I think that it was the right call ultimately. To not tarnish the brand any further, but
they said they had no other option because it didn't garner enough support.
They just didn't have the juice that they needed to make it what it's supposed to be. And we have a question in the question block where we're going to talk a little bit more about E3 later. So I'll save the rest of my thoughts for then because I do have some more specific things to take away. But I think ultimately, to put a pin on that, it's sad. It's a sad development. I think in a lot of ways, especially the last couple of years, the industry has grown beyond E3. But I also think that it was something that was very special for, us as fans, but also I think for developers and the ability to make deals. And it seems like, from what I've heard, it seems like GDC felt more business oriented this year. And a lot of those types of conversations are moving to places like GDC and some of those other solutions. So you hope that GDC will just grow over the next couple of years and it will be more popular and it will be more accessible. And it will be the kind of place that, we've talked in the past about, like in one of Jason's books, the chapter about Enter the Gungeon and how that game's, existence kind of came down to a chance meeting at an E3, right? So there's things like that you don't want to see get lost, but you hope that the Jeff Keighley's and the GDC's and the other
I think the
organizations
GDC
step up.
GDC's gonna kind of fill in that niche, I think, for a lot of indies. Like I know there was an interview with the Panic guys over on an Apple focused podcast called not Digital Foundry, Daring Fireball, the talk show, and they showed off the Playdate at GDC for the first time. That was when they showed people they like had it in their pocket and they'd be like, "Hey, look at this!" And they like pull it out of their pocket in a stairwell away from people, and they get people's impressions and see what they thought. And that's where they spoke to the Edge magazine guys, and were able to kind of get it on the front page of that magazine and have that launch for it.
Yeah, so like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about E3 in a minute here, but we've got some other big headlines to get through. We're going to talk a little bit about, I guess the question that's on my mind this week is Konami poised for a major comeback? Because it feels like maybe so. And then, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about PSVR 2's, I think, safe to say, disastrous launch a few weeks removed and what Sony can do to try and right the ship at this point, as well as a bunch of questions from you guys in the question block. So we've got a jam-packed show for you today. So let's just jump right into it. Konami is making some headlines because they have relocated one of their existing studios to its new Konami Osaka studio. And the reason this is interesting, right, is there's been a lot of movement from Konami in the last couple weeks, months, we'll say, right? We just had the Dead Cells Return to Castlevania DLC launch last month to pretty significant acclaim. We have the Bloober team working on Silent Hill 2, although that had a bit of a mild controversy this week with some misunderstandings about where it is in the process, but we know it's coming. And then, of course, there's been that ongoing rumor that had its origins on the VGC podcast, where they talked about that Konami at least had plans to have a really big presence at E3 before it was canceled, and that they were going to have both a Metal Gear Solid remake and a new Castlevania title uh, able to show at E3.
Was that
Whether or not
planned for this year?
that was according to VGC's weekly podcast.
I
That
mean,
was the
I
first
could
episode
believe
that they
that
dropped.
because they were talking about a Metal Gear Solid. I think there was rumors of that last year that we were potentially going to see, and
It's
we saw
been cooking for a while.
and we saw the Silent Hill stuff instead. But they also announced the Suikoden stuff as well. They've got a new
That's true.
new mobile Bomberman exclusive to Apple Arcade that's just come out. So they've got a bunch of stuff that they've kind of been working with. I think the difference is it's all seemingly been external teams, right? And this seems
Correct.
to be a conversation as to whether it's going to come back in house with the new Osaka studio that they're opening up.
And yeah, I think what we learned today seems to point to that, right? So like we said, we have all of their existing studios getting moved to this new space. And they had a little bit of conversation in Konami's press release about this. And kind of their goal is this new quote unquote creators first concept. Right. So this is directly coming from Konami's press release. It is characterized by a well-developed environment where creators can demonstrate their full potential and is set up in a location with convenient transportation access. As the major production center in Western Japan, the facility is fully equipped with motion capture equipment and sound studios necessary for product development. Then they go on to talk about how they have another studio that they're planning on opening in Tokyo by 2025. So again, pulling from their press release here. Scheduled for completion in 2025, Konami Group's next generation R&D center, Konami Creative Front Tokyo Bay, is in the process of construction at Ariake Kotoku, Tokyo. In order to achieve further sustainable growth in the significantly expanding entertainment field, Konami Group will strengthen its production development capabilities and continue to provide products and services for the next generation. So, I mean, to me, that sounds clear as day, right?
I mean, it's not
what their
clear to
intention
me
is here.
though. And well, I don't know because it's not clear to me as to whether this is going to be a studio that they're like subbing out to people as a creators first kind of thing. Like, can you license, say, the motion capture space, and I'm gonna say use the sound studio to record some stuff, or is it we're making new games here?
I think it's clear that that's what the intention is here, based on the language here, right? Like them saying that in order to achieve further sustainable growth in the significantly expanding entertainment field, right? Like to me, this speaks to Konami realizing that their IP and being able to invest in media properties is a kind of an untapped area for growth, right? And we know a big reason that Konami kind of shifted away from major AAA game development back in 2015, 2016 was because Konami in the West, we really only associate them with games, but in Japan, they have a pretty diverse business, right? They had those like health and fitness centers. Obviously, everybody talks about the pachinko machines and all that stuff. I I think that this is a strategic move from Konami. I think that them bringing a lot of their IP back by licensing it out to third parties is a step in that direction, because I think they do want, based on this, right? Them opening a new studio with this state of the art technology and them literally saying in no uncertain terms that they want to strengthen their product development capabilities, right? That's internal product development, right? And then continue to provide products and services for the next generation. That I think could speak to what you're talking about, maybe with partnering with other studios,
Yeah.
licensing out technology and things like that. They have a great engine. They could, the Fox engine, things like that they could license out. But I think the reason that they're doing this, right, is they call out specifically in the significantly expanding entertainment field. I think part of that is like them just wanting to be ahead of the curve, right? But also when you look at what the other business areas that they specialize in, and this is just totally armchair speculation of Mia, who is not a business person. The other industries where they are most strong are volatile when it comes to a recession. Entertainment is one of the least volatile industries during a recession, right? Or during a time of economic upheaval. Going to a gym, that's one of the first things that you're going to cut. Gambling, one of the first things that you're going to cut. It's the same story we're going to get into later with VR, right? Like people's belts get tighter when times get tough, but people don't stop looking for entertainment. And we've talked ad nauseum about how, traditional triple A single player video games or multiplayer, I guess they're obviously a bigger risk, are the best ROI that you can get in entertainment. If you buy a $70, even a full price $70 triple A game, most of them are going to go for what, 40 plus hours, 30 plus hours at a minimum, maybe 20. But even
Well, it
so,
depends
like,
what you're buying. If you're buying Persona, that's like over 100. You're getting there.
right,
It's
yeah,
value
and
for
you
money if you're charging it by the hour.
sure, and you compare that to what you're spending on, cable or going to a movie or going to a concert or going out to dinner, right? And like it's night and day, like you could spend that much getting a mid-tier meal anywhere, right? Like
Mhm.
$70 is not it's not that much money when you get right down to it compared to other forms of entertainment when you are hard up, right? And where like the budget it gets tighter. So I think given that and given the success they found with like licensing out Castlevania to make the animated series on Netflix and things like that, right? It makes sense that they want to leverage their IP in bigger and better ways than they have since they moved out of game development because a lot of their IP has just been sitting dormant and it's not making them money. And what's the point of that?
Yeah, I don't really understand why such a big U-turn, right? What was the reasoning they gave back in 2015, 2016 for closing down Kojima's studio, for example?
I think
And
I And I will say, like, this is based on my memory of those events, right? I didn't go and look at what their official statement was before this segment. But my memory of the confrontation, right, was that like Kojima wanted to spend more time and more money developing Metal Gear Solid 5. Konami felt that they had invested enough time and resources into it. They wanted to get it out. And there's that whole like unfinished portion of the game that like everybody talks about when you talk about MGS5, where like the story doesn't really end because it got rushed, and I think that was the thing that ended up kind of driving a wedge between them. And then it was this thing of like, and we know this, right? Like maintaining AAA studios is expensive. Like it's not a, um, it's not a business for the risk averse. And when you are in a bigger, broader company that owns all these different like business sectors and you have a board to answer to and you have this question of why are we investing hundreds of millions of dollars to make the Fox engine and make Metal Gear Solid 5 and do all this stuff when our pachinko machines or our health clubs are really the bottom line of the business, right? Like those are where the money's really coming from. So why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And I think, the idea that not the recession, excuse me, the pandemic would adjust that thinking makes sense to me, right? Because what are two industries that got probably pretty heavily impacted during lockdown? Gyms and gambling, right? Like again, the stuff that they were so bullish about in 2016 probably they took a bath on the last couple of years where there was a limited ability for you to monetize those businesses whereas like video games saw historic growth, right? They saw historic purchasing during that period because video games are a safe thing to do when you're stuck inside.
yeah, I can understand that. Maybe Konami saw that people were buying their their kind of legacy titles, I guess, if they were people picking up the Metal Gear Solids and the Castlevania collection and some of the new stuff they put out because they have put collections out despite not developing new games. We had the Cowabunga collection that they sent us a code for. It looks like I had a look back. There's an article from Forbes from Ollie Barder back in 2015, and it looks like you're right. It was an argument between Kojima and Konami. Kojima's studio got special treatment despite its high operating costs. People within Konami felt that that was unfair, so they wanted to kind of bring it back in house and stop the. I think the official line was stop the focus on individual studios and have it just be a Konami branded title. And Kojima just was not happy with that, and so they ousted him eventually when he wouldn't kind of come on board with the new plans. But they also spoke about being left behind when it comes to mobile gaming, and we've seen that with a bunch of other players in the industry. And that's why Microsoft. One of the reasons Microsoft has put down as acquiring Activision Blizzard King is that they feel that they were left behind in the mobile market. Sony feels like they were left behind in the mobile market. Take Two bought Zynga for the same reason. So I do wonder if I know they've got a Bomberman game over on Apple Arcade and they've got some mobile titles. Do you think that we'll see mainly mobile titles or free to play and like chasing the trends like that? Or do you think it will be a return to the traditional Konami titles that we have come to expect from them?
I think it will be both. I think when you look at most of the companies that have a really healthy portfolio, it's a mixture, right? Like you don't want to leave revenue streams untapped. And if there are opportunities for mobile wins like Bomberman and like again, like in the last couple of years, they launched that Yu-Gi-Oh! I think it was Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Masters or something like that, where it was a mobile Yu-Gi-Oh! Game. Something like Frogger, right? Contra. You can easily see some of the more arcadey style games potentially either having like a mobile version or having like an indie revival where maybe we get a Frogger collection, maybe we get a new Frogger or something like that. But then I do think you'll see them leverage their bigger AAA IPs in a more AAA way. I think this new studio that they're talking about launching in 2025 sounds to me like a studio that is aimed at developing new AAA games, and I think that makes sense, right? Like I think um done right, like, they could make a lot of money just remaking Metal Gear, right? Like, let's do a true remake of Metal Gear Solid 1, 2,
Well,
3.
another Twin Snakes.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? Is like people would buy that. Like at this point, Twin Snakes is a retro game. That game came out like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like there's an entire. I mean, honestly, at this point, there's probably two whole generations of gamers for which Metal Gear is just this legendary title you've heard of and not a game that you've played, and not a
Well, I've
game
played
that.
some of it, but even me, like someone who talks ad nauseum about video games when they have really no right to on a podcast every single week. I've never played fully through Metal Gear, not a single one of them. But
Me
I've
neither.
watched people play them. It's a real kind of blip in my gaming history, and I think if they did a remake, and I wonder if they're looking at some of their contemporaries like Capcom, right, and the success that they're having with similar titles, because obviously the Resident Evil title is often compared to Silent Hill. I wonder if they're looking over there and seeing the success that they're having over the fence and going, yeah, we want a slice of that
Yeah.
action. And rather than doing it in house, they partnered up with a bunch of other studios like Bloober.
And I think that's the thing, right? Is like they have so many IP that they own that are good and valuable, but like they really want to run like 10 studios? Probably not, right? Like I think the idea of them running a handful of studios that are like these are our crown jewels and they get all the attention and all the resources and yada yada yada. And then we do, partner with like the Dead Spaces of the world and some of the other, like again, Bloober, some of these other like smaller independent studios to bolster it, right? And like get more stuff out the door and have like a little bit more of like a Marvel Games kind of thing where it's like, okay, like who's a good development partner for this game? Who's a good partner for this game?
Do they
I don't
have
think
enough
there's.
though? Like I've looked at their list, right? And that you've got here: Metal Gear, Castlevania, Silent Hill, Contra, Frogger, Yu-Gi-Oh, DDR, and Bomberman. Is that enough? Because really, it's like three prestigious titles, I would say: Metal Gear, Castlevania, and Silent Hill, and the rest are kind of. lost by the wayside to some extent. I mean, I guess Yu-Gi-Oh is pretty popular and DDR is
And that's the
popular, but that's
thing, right? Is like
arcades.
it's such a tough thing of like I think they own a lot of valuable IP. I think they have a lot of IP that they have also like not done a good job of continuing to stand by and bolster and like make like maintain relevance, you know? Like I think that's fair. But I also think that when you look at like this stuff that they do have in their war chest, like all it takes is a good game to bring a franchise back, right? Like, and the idea that something like, Contra, for example, that is a name people recognize, is a franchise people loved that hasn't had, like a big meaningful entry in a while. I think all you need to do is put out something new, and then it's like, okay, like that's all it takes, right? To
It's gotta be
really,
good though, because, like, we saw
yeah, it
that with
has to hit.
Bomberman. Bomberman R came out, everyone was really excited about a brand new Bomberman game, and it kinda flopped a little bit, and so much so that we had to have, like, a rejuvenated version, then it went free to play for a while, and then we
Yep.
finally got a sequel, and I've not really heard anyone talk about the sequel.
And that's
It's
the
a real
thing.
shame.
Like those are big ifs, right? Like they do need to hit. They are going to need to be good, but it's also like any of these could be, right? Like there's dozens of good Castlevanias. There's tons of good Metal Gear games, right? Like the idea that somebody, right, the right partner could come along and make a new Castlevania that slaps or a new Metal Gear that slaps or that they could have a major revival of an IP like Yu-Gi-Oh or something like that is certainly not outside the realm of possibility at all. It's just a matter of like how dedicated are they to doing it and, what are the challenges between them meaningfully achieving it. And I don't think that that's a simple answer, right? But I also think that it's like if this is where they're going, like if this is the direction that they're taking and they're committed to it, there's no reason that it can't work out. It's just a
Mhm.
matter of like what does that look like, right? Like, is it something where, like, does Silent Hill 2 come out and disappoint, right? Like, does, this Metal Gear remake come out and set the world on fire and capture people's attention the way that RE2 remake did, right? And now RE4 remake is again. Those are, I think, a great example, right? When you think about those games, I think a lot of people who never played the originals, right, who were too young when they came out or weren't even alive when they came out.
Or
Um,
just even you look at it and it's just like, yeah, it's too old now. I don't want
yeah,
fixed camera angles and tank controls. I want to play a game that feels modern and fresh, and I'm
right,
one of them.
exactly. And I think there are dozens of people who are new Resident Evil fans that came on because of
Yeah,
that or
Max
came on
was one
because
of
of
them, right?
7 or 8.
Yeah, Max
Yeah.
played RE2 remake first, and then went on to play 7 and Village, and he's now a real convert into the whole franchise, which is great.
Exactly. So, it's like I think the idea that that could happen for Metal Gear or Castlevania or one of these other franchises is like super doable, and it's like, is this like the most stacked list of all time? Like, no, maybe not. But I mean, like, I think, you look at like a Capcom or any of these other studios, right? Like, you only need a few really big hits to build your brand on, and they have them, they just need to bring them
Capcom
back
though
meaningfully.
Capcom keeps developing new IP though, and that's something that I feel like Konami struggled to do and didn't really do. It
Yeah.
feels like Metal Gear was the last real big new IP that they developed. Maybe Silent Hill was that because that was afterwards, but they didn't have anything like what Capcom's been doing, right? Even stuff like Monster Hunter is a relatively new franchise for them.
I mean, not really. That's the thing, though. I think I'd argue the same thing. Like you look, like the first Monster Hunter came out in 2004, so it's 20 years old next year, right? Like first Resident Evil came out in the 90s.
Yeah, the
Street Fighter's
90s.
old as
Yeah.
hell. Mega
Well, I mean,
Man's old
but
as hell. Devil May Cry came out in the early
mhm.
aughts. It's about 20 years old. Dead Rising is old. Marvel vs. Capcom is old. Ace Attorney's old. Like, what is the new Capcom franchise that they've come out with that hits on the same level as their retro stuff versus just keeping those relevant? Because to me, the only one I can think of in the last several years is Dragon's Dogma. It was a new
They've
IP
got
from them, and
yeah,
that's
that
already
seemed to
10
hit
years
pretty
old.
well.
That came out in
They've got
2012,
that
though.
new one though, Exo Primal coming, right? They are still
Sure.
doing new things and fresh things, and I think that's something that Konami may struggle with. To be honest, I thought Konami was amping up their IP to be snapped up and just sell off the video game division and just kind of get rid.
I
Keep the arcade side of things, keep the gyms, keep all of that side of the business, but sell the IP to someone like Sony who wants something to
yeah.
bolster
A
their
couple years
in-house teams.
ago, or even a year or two ago, I think I would have agreed. But yeah, I think they're going in the opposite direction now. I think
Yeah.
they're going to double down on games from what we're seeing. Like the fact that we went from like they hadn't put out a new game since what, like Metal Gear Survive and like the odd mobile thing, and then it's like they have if these rumors are true, right? They have four major games in development or three major games in development and
They've got
a
3
major
Silent
partnership
Hill
that just
games.
released.
They got the 3 Silent Hill games that are in development. I think they announced 3 of them in one hit, from what I can remember. And
Yeah.
then there was a Castlevania thing that they were working on, but maybe that was the Dead Cells one. I'm not sure. They've got a lot of
But yeah,
stuff that they're working on.
but like I'm looking at this list for Capcom. I'm definitely right. I think their most recent franchise is Dragon's Dogma, and that's 10 years old. So it's like
Yeah.
it's you. My point being, I hear what you're saying. I think all it would take is for Konami to come back and like be dedicated to it and be like, we have a game coming out every year.
That's
We
what
have
they've
good
gotta do.
games coming out every other year for the next
You
10
can't come at
years.
it you can't come at it and be half-assed, which I
No,
feel like is where I could have seen them going until these announcements of two brand new studios. It felt like they were just willing to sub out their IP to anyone that wanted to work on it.
yeah, and I mean
Uh,
that's the thing, right? Is like they are a really like they're a multinational company and a multi genre company, right? Like they sell so many things between games and trading cards and they produce animes and they make slot machines and they make arcade cabs and they have casinos and they have fitness clubs and it's like
yeah, but that's no different to like Sega, right? Sega Sammy, that's a similar deal with them. Like they have the resorts and the arcades and the slot machines and
but
all of
even
that
that
stuff.
they moved out of that. They moved out of arcades, right? Like
Mm.
they're simplifying, and I think even that owning arcades and everything is more akin to the video game business than yeah, we also own fitness clubs. We also own casinos, right? Like that's different. Like that's a totally different industry,
I
when you get
think
right
Sega
down to it.
Sammy do still own like slot machines. It's under the Sammy brand rather than the Sega
Okay,
brand, but
yeah. I know that
together they do still own casinos.
they owned several arcades in Tokyo and I know they shut a couple of them down during the
Yeah,
pandemic.
Sega did, but Sammy is still working on like slot machines and
Gotcha. Okay.
pachinko machines and things like that. So
Makes sense.
they do still have stuff, and they've got like a bunch of toy companies like Playheart and things like that.
Sure, sure.
And they do still own golf courses apparently. So they
Really? That's an
yeah
interesting one. Sega Golf Course, huh?
yeah again that's under the
Um,
Sammy brand, Paradise Sega
okay.
Sammy
That's
or
like not quite the same
Sega
thing.
Sammy Golf.
Yeah, that's like
Yeah,
not quite the same thing. But even so, I think there's a really good opportunity here for Konami to flip the script. And I don't know that they will, but I think that if they're really committed to this and like they want to get back in and they want to prove themselves as one of the big dogs again, they have resources, they have IP. Like
they don't even need to be one of the big dogs, I don't think. And I kind of hope they come out as like a double A developer and we get back to that kind of return to what it was back in the 2010s, where it's like we don't not every single game needs to be mammoth in size, mammoth in cost, and mammoth in development time. And we can
yeah,
take some more risks and do some double A stuff. All the double A studios got snapped up. You think of like the Obsidians of the world, they all got bought,
yeah, and there's
acquired.
not too many of them left at this point.
Yeah.
That's the thing though, is I don't think Konami is interested in that because like of the kind of company they're so
I mean,
big.
they're
Like,
working with Bluebird, who's kind of almost at
yeah,
that level. Yeah, they're an indie studio at the moment, but it's like they're getting to the point where they're working on double A titles, like the
yeah,
medium.
I don't know because it's interesting because you say that, and I think you're right. But also in the same breath, I look at that as more of IP management of wanting to bring their IPs back and get them in front of people and start like making people think and care about Silent Hill again, so they can be like, here's a Silent Hill movie, here's a Silent Hill anime, like so they can continue to monetize their IP in bigger and more ways because. I think that's ultimately their goal is not like we want to get back into the video game industry for the artistry of it. It's like, no, we own all these really valuable IP that are not making us enough money. while we have these other sectors that are potentially, going
Mhm.
to be impacted by an economic downturn. People have less spare money to throw around um, for leisure or for, like health, products and stuff like that. So we shall
Yeah.
see, though.
Fingers
Definitely.
crossed. I'm not a massive fan of Konami's games, so I wanna see them succeed. It's always nice to see more players in the industry.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like you said, right? For some of them, like, I don't know that I'm not a fan of them because I couldn't be, as much as just like they're a little before my time. And like,
Yeah.
I'd be willing to try. I'd be willing to play a Metal Gear Solid remake and see if it's, if I can
I
get in on
the
it.
the only Metal Gear Solid game, because I thought about it after I said it, the only Metal Gear Solid game I really got into was the PSP one with the cards, and it
Oh,
was
hold
like
on,
I
hold
think it
on,
was
hold on, hold on. I know what it's called. Oh,
I think it's Tactics, isn't it?
oh, maybe I'm thinking of a different game then, because I'm thinking of it's the one you play as Big
Acid.
Boss.
Metal Gear Acid.
Okay, that's not the one I was thinking. What's the other one? Go, keep going. You talk about it.
I loved Metal Gear Acid. You, like, picked up these cards, and then you played them, and then you, like, walked around on a grid. It was so good.
Peace Walker. Peace Walker is the game I was thinking of.
Yeah, those tiles were good on the PSP had an absolute mega collection of games, and it's a real shame that hardly any of them are on PS Plus yet. Where's Metal Gear Acid? Pop that on PS Plus, and I'll probably subscribe and play that one.
Do it up. Speaking of subscribing, you can head over to Patreon and subscribe to this podcast, just like our Patreon producer for the month of April did. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Sobe, Snack and Go, Ty the Dude, and Waka Hula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/FlipScreen Games. You're all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Speaking of which, if you want to find links to become a Patreon producer or get a bunch of other good perks and goodies like getting the show early and all that kind of cool stuff, or you want to check out one of our sister shows, or you want to go right into the show for the question block segment, or you want to go join our Discord and keep the conversation rolling between episodes, whatever you want to do, head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website, flipscreen.games. You can find links to all the places we are all over the web and all the ways that you can get involved in this fine program. However you choose to show your support or get involved, we thank you for tuning into this week's show. So, sources are saying that if the PSVR 2 is going to survive, it will need a price cut to avoid a complete disaster. What a headline. What a headline.
Yeah, I'm sure Sony loved seeing that one from IDC this week, didn't they?
Yeah. So if you're not familiar, IDC is a market research firm that follows the games industry. They have thrown out a report where they talked a bit about Sony's PSVR 2 headset, where it is underperforming, I think, surprising no one. In its first few weeks of release, or I'm sorry, in the first few months of release, Sony is now expecting to sell around 270,000 units, which is not great. We don't have any official word from Sony on where what the numbers are at, but this is
I
based
don't
on
think they'll ever
IDC.
tell you.
No, not if it's performing the way that we think, right? But this is from IDC's data, and it's usually one you can take to the bank. Their VP of Data and Analytics, Francisco Geronimo, is how I'm going to say that. Geronimo, maybe? I don't know. Either way, Francisco, I apologize. It's Francisco is what I'm going to call you for the rest of this. Francisco said in a interview with Bloomberg, consumers around the world are facing rising costs of living, rising interest rates, and rising layoffs. VR headsets are not top of mind for most consumers under the current economic climate. I suspect a price cut on the PSVR 2 will be needed to avoid a complete disaster of their new product. And the reason that this number, I think, is important contextually, right, is that Sony's reportedly anyway, Sony's goal is to sell 1.5 million units by March of next year. And that was already a reduced forecast, right? We talked about this a couple weeks ago where I think initially the number was 2 million. And then they reduced
Yes.
that because they were
Yeah.
concerned that they wouldn't hit that target. So here now seeing 270 units by the end of March, which is as of this recording now, that's not great. The
It's in
idea that
what,
they're going to hit that goal is
2 full months they've had with that? It came out in February, right?
yeah.
I mean, I don't know what numbers they were looking for, right? 1.5 million is probably around a 10% um attachment rate for the PlayStation 5 by that point. They've sold 10 million at this point. Safe to presume they'll sell 15 or 20 million by next year if they continue to make them. People seem to want to buy them, especially with the rumor of a revised mid-gen refresh, which I think is probably just a slim model. Um, it was an ambitious target, I think. 10% is a high attachment rate for such an expensive product, and a product that costs more than the PS5. And then you need to buy games on top of that. And the titles aren't there. Like, maybe this would have sold better at launch if there was more than one, like, system selling title. I feel like the Horizon game was really Call of the Mountain was really the only title there at launch that compelled people to pick it up. Maybe when Resident Evil Village VR comes, or if Resident Evil 4 gets a VR version. I know there's a VR version of the original. Maybe they can do the same magic with the remake. Then perhaps they can
I
kind of
just
claw back some of that. But
I just don't think it's going to be enough.
me
Like, cuz it's
neither.
you mentioned it, right? And it's like no shade to I believe it's Fire Sprite is the studio that made Call the Mountain,
Yeah,
and despite the fact that Call the Mountain definitely got some good buzz, I don't think it's the system seller that they need it to be. I've heard multiple reviews from people who are like, it's a great game and it was fun and it's great to shoot
but
a
it's
bow and
no
arrow
Half-Life
or whatever,
Alex.
but it's not a system seller. It's not like a Half-Life Alex type experience or whatever. And, like, frankly, I think we overestimate the importance of Half-Life Alex because, like, again, like, did that really make Valve's headset this major success, or was it, oh, this is a blip on the map? And then what else came to it that made people buy it, right? Like, what other big exclusive PSVR 2 games are on the horizon? Because to my knowledge, it's none, right? Like, we know that there are things in development, but, like, how many of them are
Nothing's been
these
announced.
insane proprietary first party exclusive things that you can only play here and you can't play them on any of the other dozens of headsets that work on PC or other competing platforms. Like, yeah, PSVR 2 has a unique value prop in being the only console based VR headset, but does that even matter anymore? Like, is that a thing people care about? Because I think at this point, it's like, I know for me, like, I'm done with VR. Like, I think VR is like a failed experiment largely, and I'm not at all interested in investing couple $100 in a new headset, um, especially with things the way they are financially, right? Like, I just don't see it. Like, wouldn't you rather buy like 8 games,
Honestly, I
or
would rather buy something like a Steam Deck where I know that I can play my games portably. I maybe already have a collection of PC games that I want to tap into. I can get new games every single month for free from the Epic Games Store, and I can
check out
continue to
the
play
Steam
them.
Deck podcast every Friday here on FlipScreen Games.
But I
We'll
feel
tell you
like
why.
that's a much better investment for a lot of people than
I
buying a
think so.
headset, or maybe even picking if you've got a PlayStation, picking up an Xbox. You can
Yeah.
pick up a Series S super cheap these days. Everyone seems to be doing a deal. There's always seems to be a deal on that console that you can always
Mhm.
pick up, or you can pick up used super cheap. Subscribe to Game Pass, tap into that library that you've probably never played before
Much
if
better
you've only
use of your
ever played
money,
on PlayStation.
you
Yeah,
know?
far better use of your money than a headset that's underperformed, doesn't have the software to match the cutting edge hardware. The hardware seemingly is phenomenal, right? Every single review, every single person I've spoken to that's used it, it's just it blows every other headset out of the water. The high resolution screens, the haptics on the headset, the eye tracking, all of that stuff is great. We finally got good controllers with it as well. But the software's just not there, and we spoke about this when it launched. And we even had a a possible prediction on our predictions episode. I think me and you both decided not to go for it because we weren't sure how we were going to track whether the PSVR
Whether
2
or
could
not
be
it was
tracked as a
like, if it was
disaster
gonna
or not.
underperform or
Yeah,
not or whatever, and we're like, "How do you define that?" But we both were ready to predict it because it seemed obvious. And I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, to them hitting that 1.5 million number, I just did some quick napkin math. It's not gonna happen, dude. Like, here's where we're at. based on what they've already sold, they would need to sell 1,230,000 units in the next year to hit that goal. That means that per quarter, they need to move 307,500 units of PSVR, which
I mean,
means they
maybe
would
they
need
do
to
around
sell.
Christmas. They do a bundle with on like Black Friday or something. Like, I don't know.
Even so, though, dude, it's like, how many are you going to sell, right? You think you're going to sell over 300K per quarter between now and a year from now when you didn't even hit that figure in the first 2 months that it was on the market and it was like the hot new thing. Like, there's no way.
Yeah.
What is going to drum up interest that isn't a price cut, which makes it a failure, right? Because like then they're selling it at a loss and admitting that it's an L. And unless they really invest time and money and effort into being like, this is floundering. We need to right the ship. We need to get some exclusive games and shell out money for them. We need to get some of our first
They've
party
kind of
studios to
got
make
to
VR games. They're not going to
because
do that.
you lose so much good faith from your customers, from your loyal fans who bought into this product that you promised to support if you just drop it. And I feel like unless they do the price cut, unless they give it the support it needs, they're gonna kind of be forced to drop the thing. And I think when you take into consideration, we've got a new Quest headset around the corner from Meta, and that has like a phenomenal library of games. It's an easy entry to VR. Doesn't require having a PS5 already. You can just pop the thing on your face and away you go. And presumably it's going to have much better fidelity. I can imagine we're probably going to lose the Fresnel lenses in favor of pancake lenses, which would be great. And there's the rumored Decade headset from Valve. And if that gets announced this year, I kind of think the PSVR's toast because the people that were potentially thinking about getting a PSVR 2, why would you not just pick up one of the other games, one of the other headsets, play the same games apart from Horizon Call of the Mountain? Because all the other games aren't exclusive to the PlayStation.
Right, exactly. And I mean, also, like, I don't know, do those even come out? Like, does
Well,
Valve put
the
out?
Quest one I kind of feel is a guarantee.
I agree with
Th
that because
they
that's
did
their
a
whole business. But like, does Valve need to put out another VR headset? I don't know that they do.
Maybe
They
not,
might.
but I do think that is the companion product to the Steam Deck, but their focus is very much on the Steam Deck at the moment, and I think maybe they double down on that.
I think that makes more sense. And I mean, with the thing you said about Sony with like abandoning it, they absolutely will. They did it with the Vita. And like, not to mention, I think you can look at literally every one of the major platform holders, like anyone who makes hardware. Every single one of them has released a piece of hardware, had a bunch of their loyal fans spend a ton of money on it, abandon it, and suffer no consequences. Nintendo's done it multiple times, right?
Yeah.
Between the
They did it
Virtual
with
Boy.
consoles though, right? Not with accessories to consoles.
Yeah, but I mean, I would argue this is a platform. I'd say it's an accessory, but I think Sony thinks of PSVR as a platform.
Yeah, you're
Um,
probably right.
and again, right? Like we had the Virtual Boy that got a bit. We had the Wii U with Xbox. We had the Kinect, right? Like it happens. Like it
Oh,
happens
but
regularly,
the Kinect was the best-selling video game accessory of all time.
and they
They
still
sold
act
so many of those. Yeah, they dropped it, but they did support that into the next generation. I feel like
for
if they
sure.
drop this mid-gen, it's just like,
I think if they do it, they're admitting they're done with VR. I think that's what happens. I think either
yeah.
they quietly continue to support it until it, peters off, right? Like they did with the Vita, or they cut the price, they cut their losses, and they more or less admit that they're done with VR. But I think either way, they're
I
probably
don't
done
know
with
that they
VR.
can. I think
Why?
the problem they had was probably started this product right at the height of the metaverse, bullshit that was
Or
going
before
on
that,
over at
right?
Facebook,
But
right?
you think about it, it could have even
No,
been
but
way before that,
I mean
coming
the
off of
new
the
one.
PSVR, right? Which was
I mean the
successful.
new VR2. Like they probably started development then, around the launch of the Quest 2 would be my guess. And they're like, okay, we want something to compete with Facebook. We want to get back into VR. We want to claw back us being the number one headset and not the Quest 2 anymore. And I just think at that time it was a different financial situation. They probably didn't know how much this thing was going to cost to make, and they just put too much tech into it. They priced themselves out of the market, and then they didn't invest in software for it soon enough. And they got left with a product that they had to launch because they need to claw back some of that R&D money. And
Yeah.
and it was too far down the line to cancel. I kind
Yeah,
of feel that's
I
what
think that's
happened with like
exactly what happened.
kind of what
I
happened with the
think
Dreamcast when you think about it. It's like they had a plan B and a backup. They were ready to go on Xbox within like 6 months.
yeah. But I think you're right. Like, I think that's exactly what happened. I think they started development on this while PSVR was successful and while it was their number one game in town. And again, you think about back around the time PSVR was released. I remember Shuhei Yoshida, who's currently their like indie, the face of indie stuff at PlayStation, but he was the president of SIE Studios for a really long time. And I remember him talking about PSVR and then being like, well, like, we look at the metrics for success for PSVR as being different. We look at launching PSVR as being the same as when we launched the PlayStation back in 1994 and or 95, whatever it was, and that like we look at this as an investment and we are going to lose money on it and it is going to be this thing that's niche at first, but we're going to prove our investment in VR, and
I
VR is
don't
a
think they
future
have.
tech that we believe in. And that's the thing, is I think they did with PSVR, but I think the
No way they
excitement.
made their money back on that thing. I don't think.
Maybe not, but
If
that's the thing, is I think they looked at it as an investment and they looked at it as a success because they were like, this is us laying the bedrock, and we had the most popular system. We established ourselves as the only console manufacturer who's in the VR space. I think they probably did look at that as a success, and they're like, great, let's follow that up. We'll be bullish. We'll make something bigger and better and more expensive and cutting edge and all this stuff. And while they were working on it, the market changed. And I think interest in VR has dwindled because I don't think it was as exciting or revolutionary as most gamers thought it was going to be. It's prohibitively expensive, and I think that
I
because,
actually think if the experience was compelling enough, the expense wouldn't matter. I feel like
well, that's what
gamers.
I was. You cut me off before my last bullet there, which is I don't think the games have been
Yeah.
worthwhile.
But I do feel like if the experience was there, gamers will pay for it. You know,
Yeah,
we were quick to jump on PS5 and Series X when it came out. The games
or
weren't
Steam Deck.
necessarily there. But the games weren't necessarily there on the new gen consoles. I still feel like we're waiting for kind of true next gen to begin. We still haven't got a proper Unreal 5 game on consoles. We've got Fortnite running on Unreal 5, but we haven't really got anything else. And yet we were so quick to jump on it because they delivered the promise on the previous products, and the other things that the products were offering, improved load time, quick resume over on the Xbox side of things, the power of like SSD making it games and experiences that we can't get on
Yeah,
last gen consoles, and improved graphical fidelity was all really compelling. And the controller, right, over on the PlayStation side of things,
sure.
that was a real seller as well. But
That's
I
the
just
thing.
don't think
Is like,
there was any of that for PSVR 2. It's just like, oh, we've got Horizon Call of the Mountain, but why could I not play that on my old headset just at a lower fidelity and you give me new controllers, right? I feel
yeah,
like
well,
it's hard for people to understand, I think, the reason to upgrade and the reason to invest in something that costs $500.
I mean, I think that's the thing, is for most people, the motivating factor is software. It's experiences you can't have other places, right? Like, as nice as features like better load times or even Game Pass and things like that, like a lot of those things are not as big a deciding factor for people who are more casual, And I think when it comes to VR, I don't see why anyone would buy one unless they're an enthusiast. And um, I think the fact that like so many of the Gen 1 developers, right, that worked on VR titles, it kind of feels like it goes one of two ways at this point, right? You either make VR titles long enough to get acquired by Meta and keep making them, or you move on because they're not profitable. And if you want to secure the future of your studio as a studio that can continue to make games and keep people employed, it doesn't make any financial sense to work on a VR title. It just doesn't. And as long as that's the case, VR games are not going to get better, because if the most that studios can do is get like one at bat and then they're like, cool, that's all we can afford to do, then that's it. Like, we're not going to get better, cooler, more high quality VR experiences, because you need talent that works on 4, 5, 10 VR games, not one or two. And how many people are there that even have that level of experience? Because
There are some studios out there. One comes to my Shell Games, who worked on Among Us VR, the I Expect You to Die series, and a bunch of other titles. They've got a lot of experience in VR. They did a lot, some ports of other games as
yeah, but
well.
that's one. It's like how like,
Yeah,
and again, I'm not saying these studios don't exist, but how many are there? 5, 10, right? Whereas like for AAA games, for indie games, there's hundreds, there's thousands, right?
yeah, yeah.
There's
I mean, there's
developers
like
that you'll never
dozens
even
even.
hear of that
There's
churn out
dozens
games
even
that people love.
internally at PlayStation. So it's like if they've got Firesprite and that's the only studio that's really dedicated to VR and working on games, and then you've just got other studios assisting them. I don't know. It's strange. There's some weird decisions being made over on the PlayStation side of things, and I still don't truly understand what
I
happened with
think
The
I
Last
think
of
it's
Us. It's
because
like crazy.
they're a company in flux. Like I think a lot of these decisions were made by a different PlayStation, and we're just seeing them play out. Like I don't think they wanted to put out PSVR 2. I do think it was all right, we got to recoup some of the costs on this thing and we'll see what happens, right? But like the plans, the support don't seem to be there. And
Well, there's two different arms of the company, right? There's the hardware side of things, Sony making the actual hardware and kind of pumping it out, and then there's PlayStation doing the software side of things and actually branding the consoles and selling it. But I would imagine the consumer electronics side of Sony needs to make some money, and so wants to actually manufacture something along other than the PlayStation and some TVs.
I don't know.
It's
It's a
disaster.
tough
It's just
situation.
if this and the absolute horrendous Last of Us PC port, I just don't understand what's going on. I really don't. And some of like Jim Ryan's comments, I don't know. He's like one or two more bad decisions away from not having a job from, from
I
where I'm
honestly
sitting.
am genuinely surprised he's still there. I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year there's plans for him to be replaced and step
Yeah.
down, but we shall see. We do have a couple questions in the question block, so let's jump into them. We got a patented 3-question formula here from one Asobi, one of our Patreon producers, who wrote in and said, number 1, what has been your favorite video game soundtrack in recent years, like the last 5 years, is the limit that's been given to us here.
Favorite video game soundtrack in the last 5-ish years.
How
I don't
ish are
know that.
we? How ish are we? Can like?
Can we be as ish as the Cuphead release on Switch? Does that
No,
count?
no, 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 no. We're not doing that. No re-releases of games, you little punk ass. You got to come up with a game that's newish.
All right, you go because I'm stumped on this one.
I would say the first answer that immediately came to mind for me was Deltarune. Um, episode 1 came out exactly 5 years ago in 2018.
Okay, that counts because I do listen to Toby Fox's music, but I mainly listen to the Undertale soundtrack because that thing's just
Yeah,
phenomenal.
and I mean that's the thing. The Undertale soundtrack I would say doesn't count, but the Deltarune soundtrack has just as many fucking slappers. So I'm good with that.
Yeah.
I also feel like Persona 5 is in that range,
No,
isn't it?
absolutely it's
Oh,
not. It's
that's
like 10 years
2016.
old.
That game is so much older than I thought. Oh
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, that game's really old. It
It was
came out on the
7 years old.
PS3.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. 2016, so never mind. I guess Royal came out in like 2018, right?
Yeah, maybe you can do Royal,
2020.
but I still feel like that's cheating.
No, that's cheating. That's bullshit. You can't be
Yeah.
doing that. Yeah, it came out in
Uh,
2019. Okay, so that would count. That's why I'm thinking it's more
yeah.
recent.
When was Stardew Valley? Can I have that one? That's probably
No, I
too
think
old as
that's
well, isn't it?
2016, right? Like,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
what year? What year for games?
yeah, that was 2016.
I feel like Diablo 4 is prepping up to have a really great soundtrack from the beta. The problem I have with that game is I basically turned it all the way down because I was playing it while I was binge watching House. So it's like I've got House being a dick in the background while I'm slashing skeletons and carvers. So that might be one I have to listen to on its own and not really experience through the game, which is rare for me. I don't usually play games without the sound on.
I feel like Crypt of the Necrodancer, the Hyrule What
Oh,
was
that
that one
was
called?
phenomenal.
That's
Yeah,
got
the
a great
Hyrule.
soundtrack.
Yeah, that was so
Yeah,
good.
that's a
The
really good
Last of Us
one.
Part 1 is really good as well. Technically a new game.
Technically a new
That's what
game,
they kept
sure.
telling me. It was a whole new game. It's not a remaster. It's brand new, fresh.
I would also think, and this one's more borderline, but I both Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey both have really good soundtracks as well for like more
You
recent.
know, I could have Cuphead, The Delicious Last Course, because that only came out last year. So I
Yeah, that
could
has new tracks in it.
specifically say that.
So
And you know what? Road 96, the DLC, has a new song by my favorite band, The Midnight. So that's going to go there as well.
that's good.
And it was
That's
written
good.
specifically for that game. So
Okay.
what about
I this
something like
wasn't.
Guardians of the Galaxy with licensed music rather than a soundtrack? Does that
Yeah, that was
count?
pretty good. It's like I feel like licensed music, it sometimes it hits really hard, but like I'm thinking back on that, and I remember it had songs in it that were good, but I'm like I don't even remember what songs there
Mm.
were. So even though music was like a key part of it, like that's not really what stood out to me so much.
The Last of Us Part 2 only came out in 2020, and that had phenomenal music, but I do feel like it was an extension of The Last of Us Part 1. What about Ghost of Tsushima? Did that have
Yeah,
any really good music?
I was just about to say that has a good soundtrack as well. Yeah, I mean, I would give it to The Last of Us though. Like the main Last of Us theme is really good, and I think the
Oh,
new work
so good.
that Bear did in 2 was like there's some good stuff in there as well. God of War is one that comes to mind for me too that has a really good soundtrack.
You know
Um
what? How far back is 2018 is as far back as we can go, isn't
that's
it?
as far back as we can go. Yeah.
Mario Odyssey, I listened to
Yeah,
that
that's what I'm saying.
music
I said
so
that.
much. That was so good. Like, that
Come
was
on
one of
and
the first
jump up,
that was
superstar.
Why, not even that song, like, Tostarena Falls or whatever it's called. Oh my god, I loved that. Whenever you, like, pop in and it's like you're in with all the iron around you, and it's like that
Yeah.
little bass guitar riff comes in. Oh my god, it's so good.
Oh my god, I totally forgot this game counted. Celeste. Celeste has
Mm.
an incredible soundtrack. Lena Raine, are you kidding me? Like Jesus, Celeste is incredible. That is one of the
Okay,
best soundtracks in any game.
that's probably the best answer is Celeste then of the last 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, fucking come on. That is like what an incredible soundtrack that game has. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Shout out. Some good ones on this list. Some really good ones. Number 2, are there any game genres and or franchises that you really want to get into but couldn't get into yet? Which ones and what makes you want to get into it and why couldn't you so far?
Okay. This
Uh,
is
you
this
have a
is this is tough for me because like, I've got specific games, but not necessarily, like,
like
genres, I guess. Because
genres.
I feel like the genres I wanted to get into in the last couple of years, I really did. Like, I got into Souls games last year, I got into Metroidvania games the year prior. Those were kind of the 2 big genres I wasn't really playing. I struggled with JRPGs for a long time, but Persona kind of got me, to come over
Do
that
not
way of
give
thinking.
yourself that. You quit playing Persona.
I did, but I played it to, like, 70 plus hours, and I have played other JRPGs since, but not to
Doesn't
the ex to that
count.
extent. I I I kind of I guess there are titles that we spoke about at the top of the show as well, like most of Konami's games I've never touched. I'd like to go back and try them, but it's not like I've tried to get into them, but
Right.
couldn't get into them.
I think for me, it's the easy answer is Resident Evil and like more broadly horror games.
Yeah, and Hitman because you still haven't played it.
Sure, sure. That's a franchise that counts, I would say. But that one it says that you couldn't get into it, and I haven't played that yet, so I wouldn't. I think that's. I'm sure I'll like that as soon as I try it. Whereas like with Resident Evil, I've tried multiple times with multiple different games, and even though I like them, I hit a point eventually where I'm like, this isn't fun anymore. Like this is stressful, and
Oh, yeah.
that's not what I want out of a game, right? Like I get that
You got
first
that feeling with
man.
Elden Ring as well, I think. Like, you just were not having
Yeah,
fun. You were getting
I tried to get
frustrated.
into that and really wanted to. That's another one where it's just like I just don't like this. I don't think this is good. And
Yeah, that's me and Pokemon then, because like, that as a
yeah,
franchise is,
you've
like,
tried that
one
one a
I just
million times.
tried it so many times, and it just does not click with me.
Yeah.
And I really wish it did, because it's so huge, and there's so much to play in that game, and I could never ever get into into those games, and I
Yeah.
don't know why.
So yeah, it's like to answer the second part of it of like the why of it for the two I gave. I mean, for horror games, it's totally just an enjoyment thing. Is like I enjoy them in very very small bursts. I think they're fun, like with a group and like everyone's getting scared and this is fun and whatever. Like that's fun, but I don't want to sit and play a horror game by myself. And like that's the primary way I like to play games is to
I would
sit and
love
unwind and engage with it. And like
uh,
it's just
yeah,
not fun for me. You know, like it's too stressful and like it ends up feeling just like a
but you were
chore.
okay with The Last of Us?
Yeah, because I think The Last of Us to me like doesn't feel like a horror game in the same way. Like it is in terms of the like there's a survival element and you're running out of resources and you got to do this and you got to do that. But like it's still also an action game. When you kill a clicker, they go down and they're gone, right? And it's like I like that sense of like,
Modern Resident
oh,
Evil games are like that since
yeah, but they're
RE4.
not though, because like I played Resident Evil 7, and it's like, no, like this isn't fun. I don't want to be like sneaking around a house being chased by guys who are invincible, and as soon as they catch me, I'm dead. Like that's
You
not
should
fun.
play Village, have a giant woman or a big baby following you, that's even scarier. But, I wonder if you'd like Resident Evil 4, because that is no,
Maybe
genuinely, it's a
it's
giant
an
baby.
action game.
You should watch, like, Resident Evil Village with the giant baby. It's horrific, absolutely horrific.
I bet it is. I believe that. And then yeah, and then for like the soul stuff, it's just I just don't like the way those games are designed at all. And I know that that's a very controversial opinion, but that's how I feel. You know,
God, I love that
I
game. I loved Elden Ring so much. I really wanna finish it. I wanna go and play Sekiro and, like, Dark Souls and Demon Souls. I really wanna get into them. And
ugh.
Bloodborne. Please just bring Bloodborne to PC already, but actually do a good job with it.
All right, last question from Asobi. Number 3, what is the most influential video game of all time and why? I would say let's exclude Pong and games from that era since the first game is the most influential is a boring answer.
Oh, okay. Well, then I was going to say maybe this doesn't count. Tetris. And I
Mm,
we spoke about this before that I think that is probably the greatest video game of all time. And we just had the movie come out, Tetris the movie. I'm looking forward to watching that this weekend. Maybe I'll
yeah, me
talk
too.
about that next week. But I do think that was so influential in video games, in many like aspects of it, right? In development, in puzzles, in bringing more people to the genre, just because it was a fun game, and also licensing and figuring out who
Hmm.
actually owns this game and how do we license these games and make money from them and publish them and just all sorts of things, but I do there's tons of them, right? Every genre has a game that's influenced it, every single one.
Yeah, like to say like the most is like such a tough thing because it's like every game, you know, is going to influence others in its genre and other things like to varying degrees. So I think like trying to answer this question holistically gets pretty interesting. I had two answers that came to mind for me. And both of them have a more modern counterpart. So I think for my money, the answers are Super Mario Brothers and the Legend of Zelda. And I think you can extend that to Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time.
Well, I
Um,
actually think probably Doom is more influential than Super Mario 64 if you're talking about, like, exploring 3D space and things.
I don't know. I don't know that I agree because I don't think like Doom is like the first game of that ilk in terms of like, or at least the first, popular, widely played, right? Like it's certainly very influential in that way. Um, but like it's more linear in terms of like it's more of like a corridor kind of shooter, like something like a Mass Effect or something like that, where it's like it's pretty linear in terms of you go here and you go here and you shoot this guy and you shoot that guy. Whereas like Super Mario 64 is like is, I think, not the first actual open world game, but it's probably the first in terms of like how we think of open world games now. Because, like, again, that's why I brought up The Legend of Zelda. Like, The Legend of Zelda is an incredibly influential game, right? Like, it was the first game, I believe, the first Nintendo game that had a save feature. Maybe
Hmm.
even the first game that had a save feature.
No, PC
Um,
games had saves before, but it might have been the first
console did.
console game. Yeah.
So there's that, right? It was one of the first like adventure games on console that like, and again, right? Obviously, there's text adventure games that come before that, things like that. Um, but this is different, right? Like it being this is a open world that you can explore at your own pace and discover things at your own leisure, and there's secrets to uncover, and there's side things that you can do, or you could never see them, and but you don't need to, and you could beat the game with just the weapons they give you in the beginning, or you can do every single thing, and you can skip stuff, and like those are all things that to this day, right? Like you draw a line between The Legend of Zelda and you know Ghost of Tsushima, right? Or whatever, right? Like it's like so many of those things trace their lineage back to The Legend of Zelda. And I think that extends beyond its genre, right? Whereas like there's some of these other games where like Tetris, right? Like is an extremely influential game, but it's like is the influence of Tetris felt in The Last of Us? Like probably not, right? But like a lot of other things are, and like I look at Super Mario Brothers, like there's so many things in terms of just like game design and how much people talk about like how World 1-1 teaches you how to play like the rest of the
Oh
game in
yeah,
the
that's
first frame.
phenomenal.
Like that's
Yeah.
an incredibly influential design, right? And it's like there's things about it that you might not look to one and be like, oh, here's how Mario influenced this other thing. But like, I don't know. I think it's really hard to ignore the influence of those games and like how much they changed the game and how much so many other games aped what they did.
Yeah. I kind
It's
of feel
it's a
like
big
that
reason why we
does
look
go.
at Miyamoto as like the godfather of video games. It's like he
Mhm.
was an extremely influential creator, and designer.
I'm just looking to see when Metroid came out as well, because that came out the same year as Zelda, and I do think that that has a lot of influence in video games as well. The
Sure,
exploration, the side quests, the picking things up and getting new skills, and exploring like, oh, I can access new areas because I've got new skills now. That's a pretty common trope in video games. But even newer games, right? You look at something like Breath of the Wild, that itself inspired other games. You can see the glider and Horizon, but it was also inspired by other games, and you can see that by looking at the towers and from Far Cry, like the radio towers, and it shows like new areas on the map, and you can see influence in Horizon for Forbidden West from the new Tomb Raider games and the focus on arrows and crafting and things like that. So every game does influence every other game, and I think that's the best way
for
with
sure.
all mediums of art. But it's very difficult to say this one game influenced everything unless it is the first one, unless it is Pong, because that did like spawn an entire industry, and it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
this is very exciting.
That's why I think it is probably more generally not only interesting, but like I think it's probably more like intellectually honest to look at a game from like the Nintendo era or the Super Nintendo era. Like that time period is where I really think like modern video games coalesced in that time. And like so many of the games that we still think of as being like the key marquee franchises, right? Three of the ones we just like it's insane to think that Super Mario Brothers, The Legend of Zelda, and Metroid all came out within like 18 months of each other. Isn't that
Yeah.
insane?
Yeah. I mean, I also think, if you're thinking about influence not on other video games, but on the kind of general pop culture, I think you have to look at something like, Mario or Pokemon as well. Like, Pokemon was fucking massive. It spawned, like, an anime and a trading card game and plushies,
Like
and literally
30
everyone in the
movies.
yeah, and everyone on the planet knows Pikachu. So it's and everyone on the planet knows Mario. So kind of, I feel like, if you're looking at influence outside of video games, Nintendo is probably the one to look at. Like they've got a bit of a hold on that.
I think they've had the biggest cultural footprint of any video game company by a very wide margin, and it's not even remotely close.
Yeah, like even now, I think about Sony's characters, and My brain still goes to Crash Bandicoot, even though it's not been them for a very long time. I guess their mascots are like Kratos. There
I'd say it's
was Nathan
Kratos
Drake
more than
for a
anybody,
while.
right? Because like
Yeah.
Kratos has been a consistent mascot since PS2, right? God of War was one of the
Hmm.
defining. It was the last game, but it was one of the defining games on the PS2. It was healthy throughout the PS3 generation, and then we had the reboot
I
for
mean,
four. And
Ratchet and Clank was as well.
yeah, it's not as popular. Like
Yeah.
God of War is like a bona fide block. Like that sells like a multi-platform game, even though it's exclusive.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think I I feel like by default you give it to Kratos at this point. If you had to ask me to like pick one, as I feel like he's like the most consistent
I kind of feel
marquee
like it.
character
I kind of feel at the moment, Sony's kind of thinking Joel and Ellie as a combo are really
for sure.
the one, and I think that's the influence on TV and them finally having a successful adaptation.
Yeah, breaking out beyond the kind of initial
Hmm.
sphere of gamers. All right, so last question we're going to close it out on today. This one comes from that guy, one of our Patreon producers, who said, "With the so-called death of E3, what do you think will happen in the future? Will we get anything similar again?"
No,
I Yeah, I think it depends on how similar you're talking about. Will we get something that is a proper replacement for E3? No, I don't think so. I think the reason E3 existed in the first place, right, was because the major console manufacturers wanted a trade show event where they could communicate with press and talk about new products that they had coming up and get people excited for them and all that stuff, right?
not
Um,
even just press. It was like, oh, people from Electronics Boutique are here, and we're going to sell them the games, and
Yeah,
they
well,
can have a look
vendors,
and
true.
see.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah, GameStop employees and stuff like that would come, and check stuff out and report back, and, like, store managers would make orders based on what they had seen, and, like, that was the purpose of the show, was as a trade show, right? And it evolved into this, major event television type, production. And, I think for a long time, it was one of those things where it was too big to fail and it was just ubiquitous. And of course, you were going to go. And of course, you were going to spend money to have a booth and do all that stuff. And, obviously, the last couple of years have chipped away at that. I think even prior to the pandemic, it was on the downturn, right? The ESA had a lot of relationships with big publishers sour. They had that whole thing where they leaked everybody's information. Like,
Oh
I,
God.
I think I think it was on its way out because it was inherently a byproduct of or I'm sorry, a product of a bygone era, right? Like I think as cool and incredible as E3 was, and as much as I will miss it and miss the event that it was, and like all the pomp and circumstance, and this is what we're paying attention to for a week, and who's gonna win, and like everybody's fighting for oxygen to be the best at the show. It doesn't make sense for them to do that, right? There's no benefit for publishers to play that game anymore. They can do their own events and they cost less and they don't have to fight against other people. And yeah, like maybe less people will watch it or whatever, but like it's also, you're
Oh, I
spending
don't think
so
so.
much
Like, i-
less.
if you've got the games, just look at the Tears of the Kingdom stuff, right? Millions of people watched it. They've been advertising it everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
It
People will
is it
come and
is
watch your
different though.
presentation.
It's different with Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox, right? Like I think they have a level of status and prestige that it isn't as easy for the other folks. I think if Ubisoft was like, like they're doing the Ubisoft Forward this year on its own, like it's going to be part of Summer Games Fest now, I guess technically. Is that going to get as much viewership as it did under E3 when people were already dialed in to be watching E3 and they're going to watch the one that came before and the one that comes after? And I don't know, right? Like we'll see. But I
Maybe
think
not, but I feel like a lot of the shift was going towards the platform holders showing off everyone else's games anyway. You look at Xbox last year, they had absolutely tons of announcements. And yeah, PlayStation had their own event. They did show like what they showed like one thing at Jeff's thing. That was it. It was like we
yeah,
saw
they didn't really have
the
an
Last
event
of Us
last
thing.
year. Like they didn't do a real proper, like I forget what they call it, but like the PlayStation presentation. Like they didn't really do one.
Hmm.
That was like a true, huge blowout like they historically had, right? But that's the thing is
Everyone that wasn't EA or Ubisoft was at someone else's. And I
yeah.
feel like that's probably going to be the trend moving forward. I think the industry has become so I guess condensed down to those three big platforms that it's kind of hard for anyone else to do a presentation. I know Devolver still does their thing.
But
I
that's the
kind
thing
of
is, like,
think
they
that
can do them. They just are not going to have the same cachet as being on the E3 stage or whatever. Like, there's like the wholesome direct, and like that has an audience that tunes in for it, but it's not
Mhm.
doing like E3 numbers. But it's also like, does it need to? It's like I think that's the
Not really,
question. Is
no.
like, do you need to hit the same numbers if you're not spending all this money to be there and like like spending thousands of dollars to have a space on the show floor and all that stuff? It's like, you know, do I wish that there would be? Sure, but, like, I just don't think there's a space for it that makes sense anymore, and I think, like, Jeff Keighley's Summer Game Fest is as natural a successor as we're gonna get, because rather than it being everything condensed to, like, 3 days or, a week and change, it's now the whole summer, and everybody can have their own event whenever they want, and, it is gonna mean that, like, we won't have those same opportunities like we
Do
talked
you
about in
think
the
that's what it's
GDC
gonna
earlier.
be though? Because Summer Game Fest is down as just like being 1 week this week. It's like live
That's
from
the thing though,
June
is like
8th, and
it
like
isn't
they've
though.
got the events.
Because it's like they have those events that they produce, but then they also have all these other events that they put on their calendar, right? And I think that's the thing with Summer Games Fest is that like there's like the specific events that are um that are hosted by Jeff and that are produced by Jeff, right? Like opening night and those things. Um, but then again, right? Like we just talked about the Ubisoft Forward, right? Where like Ubisoft announced it, and then the Summer Game Fest Twitter was like, "Oh, we're hosting this too," and it's like they're not though. Like Jeff isn't there. Jeff didn't produce the show, but it's on his website and it's on his calendar and it's part of the conversation. And I think that's going to be how it evolves more and more. Is going to be that like yeah, in the summer, you still have these big presentations, you still have all this stuff, but it's just not going to be as condensed anymore. It's not going to be that
Mhm.
packaged, focused, like Sony's got theirs on Xbox starts and then Sony closes it out, right? Or whatever, right? Like there was a cadence to these people go on these days, and this is what happens. Like you knew the E3 schedule pretty far in advance, right? Whereas like every year for Summer Game Fest, I feel like we're like, what's going on? Like we're figuring it out as we go, right? And like not every event has the same level of cachet. Like there was that one hardware event last year where they had like no announcements. It was like a total waste of time. And then there is like the cool stuff like Day of the Devs, and then there's the cool stuff like the like the bigger stuff that you think of like the Xbox presentation. So it's like I think I think Summer Game Fest is going to be what evolves to replace E3, but I also think that 5-10 years from now, it'll probably look like a totally different thing. Because like last year, they did have in-person kiosks where journalists and folks from the press or whatever could go and play games, and
The
that
play
was kind
days,
of a
yeah, that's
more
happening
play
again.
dates, right? And like that is something where like that will feel like E3 to some degree, And I think is there a point where that becomes longer? Is there a point where Jeff eventually rents out a convention center and makes it more of a thing and lets consumers come and like yeah maybe like he might but I think
Well,
it'll have to
I was kind of surprised when Reed Pop teamed up with the ESA rather than teaming up with Jeff, because obviously Jeff's got the relationship with them from doing
I
the
mean I think there's
Gamescom
bad blood
stuff.
there now is my thing is like I my read on it is that I imagine that Jeff was looking at E3's performance in the last couple years before the pandemic, where there had been, Sony pulled out and there's all this controversy. Um, and was kind of like, look, like I feel like the blood's in the water and we need to evolve with the times and we need to evolve what the show is and it needs to change and it needs to and the ESA was
Mhm.
probably like, no, we don't want to do any of that and we don't need you. You need us. E3 is the name. That's what people care about. Jeff Keighley is not important to E3's success. Is my and I don't know anything, right? I don't know Jeff. I don't know shit, but that's
Yeah,
my
I get
guess.
the relationship with the ESA and Jeff. I meant the relationship with Jeff and Reed Pop, because he does the
Oh, why would
opening night.
Repop go to Jeff?
Yeah, because
Gotcha.
he does the opening night live thing over at Gamescom, and that's I believe published put on by Reed Pop. So I kind of presumed he would team up with them in some capacity, but
I don't think he needs them.
I guess he doesn't really need to, because he's just doing a presentation at the YouTube theater on June 8th, and then I guess he just co-brands all of the other presentations, or
Yeah.
at the very least, he kind of co-streams them over on the YouTube channel and the Twitch channel and all of that stuff, and puts them on his
Well, that's
website.
the
It's
thing
kind
though,
of
right? Is like,
becomes the place to go, doesn't it?
yeah, exactly. And I think the idea of him like partnering with somebody else, it's like, well, maybe eventually if he has a space and he needs somebody to help him with that, but it's like, to what end, right? Like, it's like, uh, I think it made sense for Reed Pop to be like, oh yeah, we can revitalize E3. We can bring back the brand of E3 because like we know how to run good live events and everything. And it was just like the well was too poisoned. You know, it's like I just don't think people have interest in being like. And again, right?
I actually
We've been
think it's
talking.
probably a timeline thing. It's like, oh, you're putting this on at the same time as Summer Game Fest, and Jeff's already got us locked in for his presentation, and you've not really told us what you're doing anyway. We kind of presumed you were dead from last year, but you've come back. You're just like a zombie that won't go away. I feel like if they were just
I
like
mean, that's the.
E3 is no longer in the summer, we're going to do E3 in autumn or spring or whatever, then maybe people would have had something to show.
I mean, maybe, but I also think that it's like I don't know. I think it can go a little bit deeper than that because, like, looking at so there's actually a statement from the ESA president and CEO Stanley Pierre Louis, who was talking about why it got canceled. He did an interview with GameSpot. Oh, I'm sorry, it was with GamesIndustry.biz. Excuse me. And he said that first, several companies have reported that the timeline for game development has been altered since the start of the COVID pandemic. Second, economic headwinds have caused several companies to reassess how they invest in large marketing events. And third, companies are starting to experiment with how to find the right balance between in-person events and digital marketing opportunities. And that's the thing, right? Is I think that's a big part of it. Is like, again, we talked about the problem with PSVR 2. We talked about why Konami would want to get back in the game space. We are heading towards a really tumultuous economic time if a lot of, predictions hold true. And the idea that we have these companies, right? And we've been reporting on these the last couple of weeks. We've had a bunch of major companies like EA and others who are escaping my mind right now, but EA just had one where they've had a bunch of layoffs, right? While they're also being like, well, we're actually operating from a position of power. Like, we're making money. We have projects in development that are going to be good, but we're doing this because there are uncertain economic times ahead and we want to make sure we can weather the storm. And you see a lot of these organizations doing that. And the idea that you have in Ubisoft or somebody like that, right? We just talked about Ubisoft and their financial struggles and woes a couple weeks ago. Do they really want to spend a couple $1,000s to be at E3 if they don't even know if anyone's going to be there and if it's going to be successful when they could be a part of Summer Game Fest
I
for.
also wonder, like, do all these people have anything to show? Like, that's the reason Nintendo gave that they weren't putting on a summer presentation, is because they've got Tears of the Kingdom, and then they've got nothing else. Sony's kind of played their hand already. They had PSVR 2 and they've got Spider-Man. Maybe they want to show us what they've got next year, but do they need
Well,
to
and
do
we
that
talked
at
about that.
E3?
They don't
Or
want to
can
do
they do
that
it
right now because
later?
they're trying to convince governments that Xbox is a legit threat to them. They don't want to come out and be like, here's the next 5 games we have in development and our stocks take a jump. And then, oh, yeah, they're not such a great argument for us anymore, right? Like, that was a crazy tinfoil hat rumor last year, was that they had a full presentation that they were like ready to go with. And they were like, they shelved it because they were like, well,
I'm not buying that at this point, because I feel like with the as we said, the disastrous launch of PSVR 2, I feel like they need to show something at this point, and
or are they
we've
playing 40 chess, Steve? And they put out
I mean,
PSVR 2 and
maybe
it's struggling. And now they can be like, look, we're struggling.
maybe Jim Ryan's just tanking the company so he gets his golden parachute and they have to buy him out of his contract. He's just done with it. He doesn't want to quit.
It's like it's a little conspiracy theory. I'm not gonna lie to you, but it's also like not the most unheard of thing. So who's to say? I do want to put a pin in this. We're going a little long on the tooth today. So I want to close it out with the incredible news that officially I am winning our predictions for 2023, everybody. Back on episode 73 of the podcast, we gave our predictions for this year, the year of our Lord 2023. And of course, your boy already on track for a third consecutive Embassy Trophy predictions win. Everybody, we love it. We love to see it
Mm.
because, of course, my risky pick this year was that Summer Game Fest will have higher viewing figures than E3. And now that E3 is canceled, I win. I get those points. That's 2 points for me on the board.
Well, we'll see, because Max does not agree with you that you should get the points in this. That he thinks that
I
this
don't
should
care
be.
what Max thinks. I told
He
Max
thinks
in that
this should be
episode that
null and void.
his opinions don't matter. It's the judge's opinions that
Yeah,
matter.
so at the moment,
I'm naming
technically,
Save the Judge. He said I got the
technically,
points on Discord.
you don't have any points until the judge has ruled on that. But
I have 2 points. We all know it.
if you want to accept that you've got 2 points, they're the only 2 points you'll get. That's fine.
Oh, those are the only 2 points I'll get. Okay, let's look at some of Steve's. How's that apology from Game Freak coming along, Steve? How's that going?
Well, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I should have just said Nintendo because they did issue an apology.
How's that is Bungie announcing they're bringing back a game no one's heard of, Marathon? Is that happening?
They definitely will. They will.
Yeah, sure.
Will.
And a new Fallout game coming out too. Yeah, that's gonna make sense, right? Not like their next game that they've already told us is the Elder Scrolls. So
all of your acquisitions are doing great. Square, Ubisoft, and Microsoft are all plain sailing at the moment, aren't they?
It's only April, baby. It's only April. We got a lot of time. Ahead of us. All right, so we'll put a pin in it there for today, folks. Thank you guys for joining us here on another episode of the FlipScreen Games Podcast. If you want to write in and let us know your thoughts on the future of E3-like events, PSVR 2's struggles, or Konami getting back in the weeds of video game development, make sure you write into us at questions@flipscreen.games, or come and join our Discord where the conversation keeps rolling between episodes. We've got a channel for each one of our shows where you can react to the last episode and talk with everybody in the community about what we were chatting about this past week. So however you choose to get involved, we really hope that you do. Head over to flipscreen.games. That's our website. You'll find links to all the places you could become a Patreon supporter. You could write into the show. However you want to get involved, we thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the FlipScreen Games Podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.